Hey the rulers, DMO73 here. It's time to get spooky with a little Aquasol Reinhardt list. Let's go ahead and jump right in. This session brought to you by Odyssey Games for pre-orders and sealed product, TCG Prime for tons of singles and supplies, Cardo Doko for international rulers looking for product, and FoulLibrary.com for articles and wonderful deck lists, as well as our guest lecturer members Vite Ramen, King Pearlshine, and Mognite. Class is in session. So this is the list. Keep in mind up here, the rulers, I'm only putting the Child of the Ethereal Moon. You can kind of play whatever other moon child you want, whether it be Child of the Light Moon, Child of the Fire Moon. Those are, Child of the Light Moon or Child of Darkness Moon are probably the kind of go-to choices. But ultimately, the real big package is the fact that we have Reinhardt being able to put those cards into the Ethereals, as well as Child of the Ethereal Moon for the same kind of reason. If you want that expanded EX zone, it has a really good God's Art to be able to cycle and going from there. Keep in mind again that we are just playing 2 copies of Soul Absorption plus Ethereal King, and that is why we are playing Spinning Aquasol. If you are playing more copies of Soul Absorption, you probably don't need as many copies of Spinning Aquasol, and it also is probably why you would cut the Mikage Reyes at that point for maybe something like Layla, which is a card that we've been seeing a lot to kind of mess with the stone deck and kind of ramp Reinhardt to be able to play other cards quicker, because one of the things that kind of Reinhardt does struggle with is the fact that he doesn't have a ton of quick cast stuff, and some of his more powerful plays do kind of cost a lot of will, and so having good follow-ups with something like Layla, Maiden of the Swamp, is a good idea as just kind of an additional potential there. So the biggest reason to kind of help facilitate getting contract as fast as possible is Mikage Rhea helps to dump a Soul Absorption into the graveyard because it's a darkness card, and then we can buy it back with Spinning Aquasol at instant speed, which is really nice. So going into the rest of the main deck, we are playing obviously 2 copies of Soul Absorption and Ethereal King, and this is kind of your, if you can get the contract to resolve, it's kind of the way you win the game outside of like Princess Beatdown, but I'll talk about that kind of loop in a second. 3 copies of Ethereal Defense Trooper, just as a way to, again, draw through your deck and keep yourself safe, kind of a stun style. 4 copies of Dexia's Ethereal Sword to help with some spot removal, as well as being able to get those Ethereals kind of into the EX area as fast as possible. 4 copies of Waterfront Demon for some good aggression, and again, controlled when your Ethereals are going to leave the field because of his banish abilities is really, really good. 2 copies of Ethereal Attack, free spot removal that's a 2-drop, so it's really hard to cancel with something like Garion is very, very nice, especially because it can destroy a J-Ruler. 4 copies of Ethereal Princess, just an all-around excellent card for this deck, absolutely great, and the fact that when it leaves the field, your opponent discards a card, so you can really just rip your opponent's hand to shreds. 4 copies of Dexia, the Ethereal Twin Prince. 2 copies of Ethereal Witch to be able to give, again, force some spot removal, which is nice for banishing a Resonator, gets around Eternal, which is really good, and giving stuff Bane. The Bane is particularly helpful with Ethereal Princess because you can just ping something for 200 damage, and then it dies because she was the thing that dealt the damage. So this can be a really cool, kind of neat early interaction to keep stuff off the board and keep yourself safe, which is really, really nice. 3 copies of Ethereal Lamentations. This card is absolutely bonkers. I really like it. Keep in mind that it does choose up to 2, so like you can force your opponent to discard 3 cards and banish 3 Resonators, or force them to discard 3 cards and you draw 3 cards, or force them to banish 3 Resonators and you draw 3 cards. Like, there's a lot of value that can be got out of Ethereal Lamentations, and it's just a very, very good card. A couple copies of Ethereal Vampire. This does give all of your J Resonators drain. Keep that in mind, not just Ethereals. The Witch only gives the Bane to Ethereals. 4 copies of Mikage Rhea, we already talked about that. Some copies of Sealed One-Eye Dragon, and then a couple copies of Dexia's Advice just to fill out the deck and be able to go grab something like Princess plus a Dexia just right out the gate is very, very helpful to be able to kind of keep things moving forward. Some sideboard options for this deck are just some things to note as Loki's Insight. You are playing a more slow deck, right? So you want to be able to make sure stuff resolves, and you might be leaving will up during your opponent's turn a lot. So you want to make use of that as best as possible with something like Loki's Insight to be able to start ripping their hands to shreds so they don't have interaction for your turn, especially if you're going to go in for the Dexia loop, or the Soul King loop. Necronomicon Barrier is also really good to stop enter effects, just in general. Witch of the Fallen Kingdom is an excellent sideboard card for stopping searching. And then Angelic Battle Barrier is also just a good card for this deck to have. Again, you're playing a more slow deck, which means you're going to have to try to protect yourself from decks that are trying to get under you, and Angelic Battle Barrier is a good way to be able to help do that. So Let's talk about the loop a little bit. It's kind of a Dexia's sword helps with this loop a lot. There's a lot of different ways to do it. The way Ethereal King works is whenever he swings, you get to reanimate an Ethereal Resonator, and then when that Ethereal Resonator then attacks, because it gains swiftness, you can recover Ethereal King, and so you can kind of do it over and over again. So if you have, it's kind of gross, but if you have Ethereal King and Waterfront Demon out, then you can do some pretty gross things where, like, you reanimate with Ethereal King, say reanimating a princess. The princess can then ping your opponent for 200 damage, and then can swing in for being pumped up, right? Because Soul King is also an ethereal, so it's already going to be at least 600 damage, 800 with the ping, maybe even more. And then once it, once it's swung and you've recovered the Ethereal Prince, you sacrifice the Ethereal Princess to Waterfront Demon, forces your opponent to discard a card. Then you can use Dexia's Ethereal Sword to put that exact same princess back into the Ethereal Zone and draw a card, and then swing with the Ethereal King, and then reanimate the princess, and then you can do this multiple times. I've gotten 4 loops off of the same Ethereal Princess before. It doesn't happen very often, but it is like pretty much game if you're gonna go that aggressive, because your opponent just has no hand and you've just pinged them to death. But there are some very neat tricks you can do with Ethereal King. Some things to keep in mind is like watching out for stuff like outer space or stuff that can steal your swiftness is kind of important to just note, so that you make sure that you don't you get to make this happen, which is one of the reasons why Soul Absorption being quick cast is helpful. The idea of like contracting on your opponent's end phase so that you can go into your turn and not care about losing swiftness, just something to know. So that is the list. You can check a link as always to this deck list in the description down below. Let us know how you've been playing Reinhardt in the comment as well. We're curious to see what other people have been playing with it. And until next time, this is DMO73 saying class dismissed.